Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. This is our first episode, and I'd like to thank everybody that is tuning in to join me and listening to this podcast. I really appreciate your support. So one of the first things that I want to get into is why I'm actually deciding to start hosting a podcast. And the simple answer is just because I love what I do. You know, the podcast is going to center around sport karate content. That's going to try to be what I talk about. Almost every single episode is going to be some discussion centered around sport karate. And primarily just because I love talking about sport karate. I consider myself a bit of a sport karate historian. I study the history. I watch the YouTube videos from before I was a competitor and try to, model some of the things that I do off of some of the greats that have come before me. So I love the sport more than anything in this world, and I want to be able to interact with the community a little bit more, which I feel like I can do through this podcast. And I was also inspired by a couple of people. I think that the Inside Scoop with Alex Dingman and Jeff Doss is a fantastic podcast that's out right now. They post a podcast every week, and I tune in every week. There's others hosting podcasts. Mike Welch has a What's Up Wednesday that he posts on Facebook Live that I really enjoy watching as well. And I think that it's good to have discussion about different topics in the martial arts community. And sometimes the discussions are going to be more serious about, proposed rule changes or certain tournaments or what have you, or certain divisions, things like that. And sometimes they'll just be more fun discussions about different competitors and what they do and their lifestyles and things like that. And hopefully in the future we get to where we're hosting some interviews and things of that nature as well. But for episode 1, you may have noticed by the title, today we're going to stick with more of a fun discussion. And the discussion that we're going to jump into first is if fighters were NBA players. And I'm going to kind of describe what's going on with that topic here in a second. But just an overview of the way that this podcast is going to work. Every week, we're going to have a discussion segment with some different topic that's going to be the brunt of the podcast. We're also going to be doing a story time. So one of the things that I do when I teach my seminars, and one of the things that the students seem to love most, is when I teach a story time. And that's basically just me sharing one of my personal experiences of my years competing or teaching within sport karate. And so today I'll be sharing one of those stories with you. And then the third segment is going to be what's called tournament talk, where we'll either do a preview or a recap of a tournament that's around the time of the release of the podcast. And that's what we'll be getting into today. So going into the primary discussion for today, the discussion that I wanted to do is just a fun one, if fighters were NBA players. And I guess the best way to describe this is not necessarily my favorite fighters. These are not necessarily the fighters that I think are the best fighters. These are just fighters that I think had very, very good parallels to these particular basketball players. A lot of people don't know this, but even though in the past 10 years, I haven't fought competitively, but watching point fighting is one of my absolute favorite things to do at a martial arts tournament. I love watching, especially my Team Paul Mitchell guys fight. There's other fighters that I really love watching. I think it's a fascinating sport. I think it's a human chess match. I love everything about watching it. And so while I don't consider myself an expert in it, I do feel that I know enough to give my opinions and talk about it a little bit just from being a fan. But keep in mind, this list does not mean that I think that these fighters are particularly the best or what have you. These are just fighters that I thought had particularly interesting parallels with certain NBA players. And so the first one right off the bat, we're going to throw out Raymond Daniels. Raymond Daniels is the first point fighter that most people think of when you say the word point fighter. And when you say basketball player, most people think Michael Jordan. I think that this one's pretty self-explanatory. Raymond Daniels is widely considered to be the greatest point fighter of all time. And Michael Jordan is widely considered to be the best basketball player of all time. And also just their mentality, the way they went about it. Both of these individuals absolutely hated losing and did anything that they could do to avoid it. And so I think Raymond Daniels, Michael Jordan, that's a very easy parallel to make. Going on down the list, we have Pedro Xavier, an old Paul Mitchell great from back in the day, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And this is because Pedro was the GOAT before the GOAT. Before there was Raymond Daniels, it was pretty universally considered that Pedro Xavier was the best point fighter to ever live. And obviously you can have debates about that. People say, Nasty Anderson and others. And I have a ton of respect for all of the fighters from that era. Obviously I have a little bit of Paul Mitchell bias with Pedro. But Pedro was widely considered to be one of the greatest fighters to ever live in his heyday. And so much like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar holds all the statistical records in basketball. And that brings me to the next person who's starting to challenge some of those statistical records, which is LeBron James. And this one I have a really interesting point fighting comparison. I think that Ross Levine is a lot like LeBron James. From a consistency and a longevity standpoint, they're almost identical. Being able to put out the same level of performance for years and years. As long as I've been competing, Ross Levine has been winning point fighting overall grands, open weight, what have you. Ross Levine has been extremely consistent for an extremely long period of time. And another thing is, all of the quintessential things of both of these sports, both of these athletes do very well. So LeBron James, the three most important things in basketball are scoring, rebounding, and assists. LeBron James does all three of those things well. You could draw a similar parallel with Ross Levine, where you say a reverse punch, a defensive sidekick, and a blitz are three of the most important things in point fighting. Ross Levine does all of those things well. And then the other parallel between Ross Levine and LeBron James is their business success outside of the martial arts. Ross Levine went to school, I believe his title is a physical therapist. It might be something slightly more involved than that. But Ross is very successful in business right now as well. Not just business outside of the martial arts, but also business within the martial arts. I always see Ross Levine hosting seminars. I've watched a few of Ross's seminars. He teaches an excellent seminar, by the way. And so just the success outside of the area of competition, much like LeBron James has done with, movies and other business ventures and investing in companies and all the things that LeBron has done outside of basketball, I feel like is very comparable to the things that Ross Levine does when he's not on the mat. Now, one thing about the podcast is that they will be interrupted sometimes with advertisements. So our first advertisement for today is for the Flow System. The Flow System is a one-of-a-kind weapons training program that is designed to teach instructors how to teach a weapons program. One of the most common reasons that martial arts schools don't offer a weapons program is the instructor may not be trained in the weapon and may not be confident enough to teach it. The Flow System provides an opportunity for instructors to do that. The Flow System features a bow staff curriculum featuring myself, Jackson Rudolph, as well as a comma curriculum featuring Mackenzie Emery, and is powered by the Martial Arts Industry Association in coordination with Century Martial Arts. Check out theflowsystem.tv today. So jumping right back into our discussion of basketball players and their parallels with different point fighters, this is one comparison that I really, really liked. Zolt Murati is just like Tim Duncan. Quiet, all about technique, and you never see either of these competitors ever make a mistake. So Tim Duncan was not a demonstrative, outspoken kind of guy. He showed up, he did his job, and he did everything right. Like you never watched a Spurs game and said, "Oh, Tim Duncan cost the Spurs that game," right? Very similar, Zolt Murati. Zolt Murati, quiet, not super outspoken. He was never somebody that you saw score a point, then yell and pump his fist about it, right? He just went out there and did his thing. He was all about the basic techniques of the game. You didn't see Zolt throwing tornado kicks or 720 kicks. He stuck to his basics, and he was extremely skilled with those basics. And when you watch Zolt fight, he hardly ever made a mistake. Next comparison, Jack Felton is Steve Nash. And the primary reason for this is I feel like sometimes people forget how good both of these competitors actually are. People forget that Steve Nash was a two-time MVP of the entire NBA. Steve Nash, this point guard, was the MVP of the entire NBA 2 different years. And a lot of people forget how great Steve Nash was. I think it's very similar with Jack Felton. Jack Felton has always been a great fighter. He's always been a dominant lightweight fighter. But I think that, in team fights and always being on the same team in All-Stars as Raymond Daniels, sometimes Raymond being there, people just forgot about how good Jack was. And obviously you won't forget that if you just watch Jack fight. I mean, Jack, even to this day, is one of the best fighters on the planet. And Jack is somebody that's always impressed me, super good guy. I think he lives one of the best lifestyles of any martial artist there is. It looks like every week he's posting on Facebook about being in Hawaii and snorkeling and all this. So Jack Felton just lives one of the best lives of any martial artist. But anyway, I do feel like sometimes people just forget about Jack Felton's greatness, and I think that that's the same for Steve Nash, and I think that that's something that should not go unmentioned. Another one that I really, really like and felt kind of strongly about, Jason Borelli, Vince Carter. incredible highlights and ageless wonders is what both of these people are. So Jason Borelli, if you go back and you watch highlights of Jason Borelli fighting, he would do things in fights that were ridiculous. Spin kicks, aerial kicking, head kicks, whatever it may be, much like Vince Carter would go out into a game and jump over 7-footers and dunk the basketball. I mean, it was just insane, the type of things that both of these guys could do in their prime. And we just saw Jason Borelli going out there and competing at diamonds. Vince Carter setting all kinds of records for being the oldest NBA player to do this, the oldest NBA player to do that. We just saw Jason Borelli go to diamonds. I believe he's fighting for K-Talk right now. I'm pretty sure Jason Borelli's fighting for K-Talk right now. And he went and he had an excellent showing. Made it to the finals of the senior diamond ring for point fighting. I believe he lost to El Java Abdul Qadir in the final, who's also an excellent fighter. But Jason Borelli had several highlights just throughout that weekend. I think that in the eliminations, I saw him hit a guy with an axe kick that came from nowhere. And it was vintage Jason Borelli. Much like in Vince Carter, you see him just over 40 years old now in a basketball game, he'll still pull off some type of windmill dunk or something. And you're like, how is this still happening? So from the incredible highlights to their longevity, I think that Jason Borelli is very much like Vince Carter. Moving on, one of my favorite fighters, an ex-teammate of mine now fighting for Team Dojo Elite, Cameron Dawson, just like Shaquille O'Neal. Physical dominance. Those are the two words that define both of these people. Physical dominance. When Cam goes into a ring, he just simply overpowers whoever he's competing against. I mean, Cam is built like a football player, and he's a point fighter. The dude is built like a truck, and you know, when he does like that little step-in back fist that he does, very old school type move where he locks that step-in back fist out and he lands somebody with it, you hear that pop every time. If you catch a ridge hand to the ribs from Cam Dawson, you're going to be feeling that for weeks. So Cam is somebody who is one of the best heavyweights in the world right now, and he's beating people through his sheer physical ability, just being stronger than other people. Obviously, Cameron's an extremely smart fighter. He has great strategies going into it. He's got great coaching behind him as well. All of those things too. But one thing that is particularly important about Cam's game is his strength, very much like Shaquille O'Neal. Shaquille O'Neal, especially early in Shaquille O'Neal's career, he would get into the paint and just bully people. Like there was nothing you could do to stop Shaquille O'Neal from scoring the basketball. And I feel like that's very much like Cam. Like when Cam decides that he's going to hit that back fist right on somebody's forehead, he's going to do it. Much like when Shaq decides that that ball is going to get dunked, he's going to dunk the basketball. Now, going into this next one, I want to make it very clear that this comparison is based only on the competitor's point fighting resume, because this particular competitor's resume exceeds far beyond just point fighting accomplishments. And that is Kevin Thompson. And I'm comparing Kevin Thompson to Kobe Bryant here for two reasons. Number one, killer mentality. In every story that I've heard about Kevin Thompson as a point fighter, in the YouTube videos that I've watched, and in the couple of times that I was blessed with being able to watch him run forms in competition, again, we're staying just to the fighting here though, Kevin had the same killer mentality. Kobe calls it Mamba mentality. The mentality of, there is nothing in the world that's going to stop me from trying to beat you. That is something that both of these competitors showed every single time that Kevin stepped on the mat or Kobe stepped on the court. You knew that if you entered the field of competition with either of those competitors, that they were going to do every single thing they could to try to win. And then on top of that, just overall greatness. Kobe Bryant is a top 10 basketball player of all time in most people's point of view. Kevin Thompson is a top 10 point fighter of all time in most people's point of view. And in my opinion, he's the greatest overall sport martial artist to ever live because of his additional success in forms and weapons, as well as the longevity of that success. Not to mention the fact that he is kicking ALS's butt. The fact that the dude has been able to keep fighting for as long as he has is incredible. He was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, back in 2012. It's 2019 and Kevin is still fighting. That's the reason. That's part of his greatness, is the fight that he shows even now, and the spirit that he has now, and just having conversations with Kevin, and I text with Kevin sometimes, and just the spirit that he has is incredible. It's the reason he is still the active captain of Team Paul Mitchell, because we all rally behind Kevin and his spirit. So there's Kevin Thompson. The next one's an interesting one. Roman Brundle is like Giannis Antetokounmpo. And forgive me if I'm pronouncing the Greek freak's last name wrong there. Antetokounmpo is a hard one to get out. But with this one, I see just the physical gifts. Giannis is extremely physically gifted with his length, which is extremely beneficial to playing basketball because the length also gives him height. He can get around people very easily. His Euro step is lethal. So there's a lot of things about Giannis's game that are based on his length and his height and his just physical structure. And I feel like Roman's game is very the same way. Roman is a dominant kicker very much because his legs are 400 miles long. And granted, Roman's an excellent fighter as well, very skilled, very, very talented. But one thing that gives Roman a significant advantage is his height and those legs being able to get such significant reach, where in point fighting is a sport where distance is so very important. And Roman controls the distance of all of his fights using those legs. It reminds me whenever, Roman puts that leg up in the air and is holding it, waiting to drop an axe kick on somebody or something like that. That reminds me just like when you see Giannis of the Milwaukee Bucks coming down the lane, and sometimes he'll just take the ball and he'll just put it above his head because he knows that nobody else can reach up there to go get it. And it's just very, very similar in that kind of specific image between Roman and Giannis. And then my last comparison for this discussion topic today is Avery Plowden being very much like Kawhi Leonard. And one of my notes here is I say, Avery always takes advantage of opportunity, very much like Kawhi has taken advantage of opportunity. Kawhi was, the kind of a role player in the big three with the Spurs, and then Kawhi found himself in an opportunity in the finals where he essentially took over the finals with his defense and proceeded to win a finals MVP. Then you fast forward to his time with the Raptors. He spends 1 year in Toronto playing for the Raptors. The Warriors get a little bit banged up. Kawhi smells blood and goes for it. And the whole playoffs, you could just tell that Kawhi was a different player. He saw that there was an opportunity to be able to go and take another NBA title and bring a title to the country of Canada. And Kawhi did just that. Then he sees this another excellent opportunity to go and be a part of a great team in the Los Angeles Clippers, who had a great young core, but Kawhi could go to that team and everybody would still know that Kawhi was the man, right? Lou Williams is great. Kawhi's still the guy. Montrezl Harrell's great. Kawhi's still the guy. They bring in Paul George, a great co-star to Kawhi Leonard, but Kawhi is still the guy. Now, as far as all of that, that's just an illustration of how Kawhi Leonard has taken advantage of opportunity in his career. With Avery Plowden, I don't think of this as much from a career standpoint as I do from just watching individual fights. When I watch Avery fight, very much like other fighters that I mentioned on this list, and the fact that he very rarely makes mistakes. You don't see Avery screw up very often. He's very disciplined in his game. I think a lot of that comes from the excellent coaching that he receives from his dad, Richard Plowden. But any time that somebody, slips up the slightest bit or isn't paying attention in a fight, sometimes the center says go and the other fighter's not paying attention. Avery takes advantage of that opportunity to score every single time. And that's a huge part of the reason that he was able to claim a diamond ring here a couple of weeks ago, is because he doesn't make mistakes, much like Kawhi does not make any mistakes on the basketball court. It seems like Kawhi does everything right. And he takes advantage of every opportunity that the other fighter gives him. If there's the slightest window for Avery to try to get some points on the board, he's going to take advantage of that. And the other thing is excellent fundamentals. When you watch Kawhi play, you don't see, anything necessarily spectacular. You don't see him pulling up for 40-foot three-point shots. He gets the occasional poster, but he's not known for his athletic dunking or anything like that. And Avery Plowden. When you watch Avery Plowden fight, he's going to put up points, but he's going to put up points with his sidekick. He's going to put up points with his blitz. He's going to put up points with his reverse punch. He's going to put up points with his basics. And so that's why I think that the comparison between Avery Plowden and Kawhi Leonard is a pretty good one as well. And that's going to conclude our primary discussion segment for the day. And we're going to move on into another advertisement here, this time for Century Martial Arts signature weapons. Century now has 3 signature lines of weapons: a bow staff line featuring myself, Jackson Rudolph, a nunchuck line featuring fellow Team Paul Mitchell member Danny Etkin, as well as a Kama line featuring fellow Team Paul Mitchell member Mackenzie Emery. All high quality weapons, all of them following the same custom specs that each of these competitors uses in competition. And some of the best weapons that you can get on the market. Check out centurymartialarts.com and search Signature Series, or search Jackson Rudolph, Mackenzie Emery, or Danny Etkin in the search bar to view all of Century's signature weapons products. And now we're going to move on into the next segment of the show, which I call Story Time. And the story that I'm going to tell today is probably one of my favorite stories to tell just because of how important it is to me as a martial artist. And that is the story of the day that I got on Team Paul Mitchell. And this is a big deal for anybody that's ever been a part of Team Paul Mitchell, because I feel like anybody that's ever been on the team understands the legacy, understands the family, understands the history that you are becoming a part of simply by being on the team. You know, in 30 years of history, over 30 years of history of Paul Mitchell, there have only been, just over 100 different athletes represent the brand. And, when you think about that and you divide that out, that's not very many people. Over a course of 30 years to only have, just over 100 different people on the team is a very select group. So it's a big deal for anybody. But my story was especially unique. So I got on Paul Mitchell on Friday, July 13th of 2012. And that is a date that I will never forget because of how monumental that day was. Not just because I was getting on the team, but because of how I got on the team. Typically, when Paul Mitchell picks up new members, they pick people up in the off season when there's still time before the next tournament's going to be, because there's a big mental adjustment. You got to mentally prepare yourself for the fact that you are about to represent the most decorated team in sport karate history. And there's a lot of pressure involved with that. So most of the time, I've seen players in the time that I've spent on the team, normally we add new athletes just after Diamond Nationals. They've still got time before they get to AKA Warrior Cup, and there's time for these adjustments and these logistics to get figured out. With me, that was a little bit different. I got on the team in July, and it wasn't just any Friday in July. It was the Friday morning of U.S. Open. So what's happening is I had won several overalls leading up to this point. 2011 was a really dominant season for me, and I had won. 2012 was the year that I moved up into the 14 to 17 age group, and I'd won several overalls that season as well. I was very fortunate to be doing well. Obviously, I trained really hard and was doing my best, but was very blessed to be in the position that I was in. And we get to U.S. Open. At this point, I had been winning so consistently that I was like, man, why has Paul Mitchell not called me? I'd gotten offers from other teams and that sort of thing, but I had remained loyal to Change the Game, who was my coach's team, Lauren Carney. And I was staying with Change the Game because Lauren was who I trusted. Lauren was my coach, and that's what I was sticking with. And the only team that I would have ever left for was Paul Mitchell. And I was getting frustrated that Paul Mitchell wouldn't call, because I was like, well, maybe I'm just not good enough. What more can I do? How can I get better? And it was making me a better athlete, because I was trying to do every single thing that I could to get on this team. And so Friday morning of U.S. Open, I'm obviously not thinking that I'm going to be competing for Paul Mitchell that night. I'm, getting ready to put on my Change the Game warm-up outfit and go down and get ready to try to go win another U.S. Open. I was the two-time defending champion of the U.S. Open at the time. I'd won 2010, 2011, and was going for 3 in a row in 2012. So anyway, I get out of the shower the morning of that U.S. Open, and my dad is on the phone with Lauren. And normally when I talk to Lauren, it's a very fun conversation, because Lauren and I have known each other so long that we're pretty friendly at this point. So, normally when I talk to Lauren, it's like, hey, what's up, Jackson? That type of deal, right? But this was very different. My dad was like, hey, it's Lauren, kind of serious. And then I pick up the phone, and then Lauren's like, hey, Jackson, kind of serious. And I'm like, oh, what did I do? What's wrong, right? And that's when Lauren tells me that they just got out of a meeting with the executive team of Paul Mitchell, and they'd like me to, and I believe the exact quote was that they would like me to change colors for competition that night. So literally from that phone call, and I start crying a little bit. I say, thank you. And I'd love to represent Paul Mitchell, all that. I get over to Lauren's room. I get one of Lauren's old warm-up jackets and a spare uniform they had laying around. And I literally went down to compete 30 minutes after learning that I was on Team Paul Mitchell. And that was probably the most surreal experience of my life. Was something that I'd wanted for so long. I initially set my goal of getting on Team Paul Mitchell back in 2006. And 6 years later, for this to be all happening at once at the biggest martial arts tournament in the world, at the U.S. Open, with me knowing, being a two-time defending champion, that tomorrow night I'm going to have to go on ESPN and put on a good show, not only for myself and not only to try to win, but also now I'm representing Team Paul Mitchell. What I always wanted was just a super, super surreal experience. I still remember that very first form. I'm not a competitor who typically gets nervous. I'm a very calm competitor. I'm very even keel when I compete. But that first form, going down there Friday night and running that creative weapons division, especially since I was the new guy, so all the executives were lined up watching me. Steve Babcock, Coach Rodriguez, the founding fathers of the team, Chris Rappold, our executive director, I believe Julie Sowald, who was in charge of the sports marketing and stuff for Paul Mitchell at the time. Everybody was standing there around the ring watching this form, and I just remember being so nervous, and it really probably wasn't one of the best forms that I'd done, but it was good enough to win me that division, and I was able to have a good weekend that weekend. I wound up going on to win the third straight U.S. Open title, third out of 4 straight U.S. Open titles the following night on Saturday night. And to be able to do that representing Paul Mitchell and for it to happen in that way was truly special to me, and that's something that I'll never forget. For the rest of my life, I'll always remember Friday, July 13th, 2012 as one of the best days of my life. And my tenure with Paul Mitchell's been incredible. I'm the longest tenured member of the team now, longest tenured active member of the team now, and being able to be a leader for some of the younger guys on the team, it's a special experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I love Paul Mitchell. I bleed black and white, and anybody that's met me before knows that. But now the podcast listeners get a little taste of that as well. And so now we're going to be moving on into our next segment, which is going to be tournament talk. And this week we're going to be doing a preview of the Toronto International Tournament of Martial Arts Champions. This is a NASCA 5A event promoted by none other than Mr. Mike Politi. Puts on an awesome event. This is going to be December 6th and 7th, 2019. So coming up right around the corner. One of the coolest features of Mr. Politi's event are the free seminars. So you get free seminars with pre-registration. And the seminars feature myself, Jackson Rudolph, Trevor Nash, who excellent point fighter. Always loved watching him. One of the best sport karate families to ever live. Trevor Nash, his wife, Casey Marks Nash, and then his sister, Chelsea Nash, all dominant competitors. I could go on for hours about Casey Marks because Casey trained Lauren, who trained me, so that's a whole lineage thing. Anyway, so Trevor Nash will be teaching, Morgan Plowden will be teaching, Ross Levine, Jarrett Liker, Anthony Diamores, and Julian Chameron will all be teaching. So an awesome lineup of instructors. You got point fighting, you got traditional forms, you got double bow staff, you got single bow staff, you got sword, a little bit of everything there. And those are free seminars with pre-registration, which is extremely unique. I don't know of any other events that host anything like that, but that's a really, really cool feature of the Toronto International Tournament of Martial Arts Champions that Mike Politi puts on. And the other thing about this event that you need to make sure that you're there for is world championships are still yet to be determined. I've got several students that I know have world championships that are still up in the air going into this weekend. I wish them the best of luck. It's going to be exciting because it's one of those things where I feel like everybody in the ring, from the parents to obviously the competitors themselves, and I feel like even the judges that follow the NASCA circuit, whether they're other promoters or just people that come and help out and judge all the time. You can kind of tell as you get to the end of the season that everybody knows what's up. Everybody knows that this is where the point totals are going to be decided and world championships are going to be won. So it's really exciting. Fortunately for me, I think that all of my divisions are pretty much decided. So I'm just going to have a good time, teach some seminars, and hopefully try to win me another overall this year. But really looking forward to watching some of my students going for some world championships, as well as other competitors that are going to be going for world championships December 6th and 7th, 2019 at the Toronto International Tournament of Martial Arts Champions. So there's a quick little preview of that event. That's what tournament talk is typically going to be like, unless you guys request that you have a specific tournament you want me to talk about and give a little bit more in-depth information on. One thing that I'd also like to do in the future of this show is host a question and answer session, so that if anybody has specific questions they'd like to ask that they'd like me to discuss, I already have the first couple of discussion topics planned out for the first several shows, but I'm definitely happy to hear any feedback that you guys have, including the quality of the show. Do you guys like the format? Do you guys like the story time? Do you like the discussion that we've done so far? Also, just the audio quality. I want to see how this first one comes out. and then maybe look into getting a little bit higher end external microphone to make it sound a little bit better for you guys. We'll see how this plays out. And if you enjoy it, please, I'm going to be posting this up on Facebook, up on Instagram. I'm going to get on all the social media platforms. So if you enjoy this, if you think somebody else would enjoy it, please share it. I'd love to hear your feedback, and I hope that we can make this something big. Like I said, I'm doing this because I love the sport martial arts community. And that's another thing I wanted to mention. Shout out to sportmartialarts.com for starting the sport martial arts Facebook community. I think that's an awesome step. I'm not sure what my rights and all of that are with privacy on that page, but I'll probably share this to that page as well so that everybody can have a look at it. But anyway, yeah, so if you know anybody or if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it for me. I'd love to get a little bit of a following on here and be talking about topics that you guys want to hear discussed. And also notice that I'm going to try to keep these a little bit shorter. Most of them are going to be right around 30 minutes, just so somebody with a little bit of a long commute to work could listen to it then. Because it's just me, I'm not going to be doing a lot of discussions with other people. We'll be doing some interviews later on and stuff like that, but it's not going to be like the hour and a half podcast that you see some people doing. This is just going to be a little 30-minute show that's going to be just for fun every week that I hope that you guys can enjoy. And once again, thank you to everybody that's tuning in. I'm Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 1 of the Jackson Rudolph Podcast. See you next time.